Rightio, we might make a start, everyone. Can I just get a thumbs up from one of the panelists that you can all hear me okay? Yep, lovely. So to open the webinar this morning, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we're gathered today. Escient acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. As it's an online event, many of us are in different locations today. You may wish to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land wherever you are. For me, I work and live on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne. It's now my absolute pleasure to welcome the panel for today. From left to right on your screen, we have Rob Sleath, the Executive Director of Programs and Change at Deakin University. With approximately 60,000 students, Deakin University has over 45 years of experience as one of Australia's leading tertiary education providers. Next, we have Matt Robinson and Manuela Andrysik, both directors here at Escient and specialists in PMOs, programs and program management. I'll be your moderator and panel facilitator for today. I'm Rebecca Campbell-Burns and I'm the Managing Director of Escient in Victoria. And finally, but not least, we've got Mike Walters, the GM and CIO of the RAA Group. RAA is a South Australian member-based organisation that's been around for more than 116 years, providing quality motor, home and travel services to its members. So just a little bit about some housekeeping before we get underway with the event. We'll run with a panel discussion first, followed by a general Q&A. Please feel free, and we'd encourage you to type your questions into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Just a note, please make sure you use the Q&A function, not the chat function, so that we can get through as many questions as possible and that we don't miss any. We'll be keeping a close eye on the Q&A tab. So feel free to post those questions throughout the panel discussion and we'll come to those towards the end of the hour we've got together. Anything that we don't get to, we will certainly look to publish on the website and send out links to after the event, which will also be recorded. So now, without anything further in terms of introduction, I'll hand over to Matt Robinson because he's going to just give us a little brief background on the event. Over to you.
Thanks, Beck. Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to first, welcome to everyone that's on the line and give a bit of a briefing about, why we're talking today, who are we talking to. So when we're talking about PMOs today, we're using the term in the broadest possible sense. If you're familiar with P3O, principles, you'll know that they're, portfolio officers, program officers, project officers, centres of excellence. And we know from our own research that PMOs go by many names and take many forms. So for the sake of today, our definition of a PMO is any entity, however loosely formed or virtual in your organisation, that's helping to deliver projects and therefore realise the company's strategic objectives. And the second thing, I guess, is why are we doing this? So we've been running a PMO survey for 4 years. And generally we don't we present the facts that we gather in the survey, but as I said, PMOs take many forms and, we're kind of reluctant in the survey results to dictate what PMOs should be doing most of the time. But I think, 2020 was a, tumultuous year for a lot of people and a lot of organisations. And just in that climate, as well as organisations struggling, PMOs have been struggling as well. So we thought we'd just have this session to talk to people, on the ground about what they can be doing and how their PMOs can help their organisations survive and thrive. So that was really kind of setting up the session. And that's all I wanted to say as a kind of introduction, really. So, yeah.
Thank you, Matt. We might move into our first question for our panellists, if that's okay. And I'll pick on Rob and Mike respectively for this same question. But the question is, what do the next 12 to 24 months look like for your organisation from an investment and projects perspective? And perhaps we might start with you, Mike, if that's okay.
I thought you were going to go with Rob, respectively. Oh, that's okay.
Shaking it up.
Look, I think the opening slide there that Matt put up really tells the story in lots of ways. You know, like all organisations, you know, we were, you know, in a state of, you know, just dealing with, I guess, the immediacy of the COVID outbreak and, you know, all the things that meant to our organisations. You know, getting close to 1,000 people sort of off site and hopefully still productive in some form. You know, really, you know, parts of our business. I mean, we have a sizable travel business, for example, that, you know, clearly wasn't going to be functioning very well, but still critical services around, you know, insurance and, you know, roadside delivery and those sort of things that, you know, we needed to keep running. So, you know, it was a challenging period, and we took the opportunity, I guess, in that challenging period to step back from our organisation and really re-strategise. You know, there was a number of, I guess, catalysts for that, but, you know, fundamentally, there's a sense that the world has changed, and the world has changed, you know, quite significantly, and is likely to be an ongoing change. And whether that's, you look at that through the digital lens, you know, where I'm just reading an article about Afterpay. Gee, I really wish I'd put a few bucks on that a year ago about now. I probably wouldn't be talking to you. You know, with you know, consumers shifting dramatically to the digital channels, and for those that have been around long enough, like me, and went through the dot-com bust, you know, it looks like that's now going to be a sustained channel for people. They're looking to transact with communities, with organisations through there. You know, the whole work from home thing, you know, flexibility in the workplace is now, if it wasn't fundamental beforehand, is now fundamental. And our ability to sort of attract and retain people and talent is only going to get more and more dependent on organisations' ability to offer really good flexible capabilities to get work done. So, yeah, so we sort of re-strategized the whole organisation. We sort of put a hold on the PMO. We had going into what must have been early 2020, I suppose. You know, we had a long list of projects. None of them, you know, when I look back, none of them really earth-shattering, you know, but too many of them in lots of ways. So our PMOs really served a great function to help us re-clarify, you know, what we need to do to now execute on our fresh group strategies.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you. And Rob, over to you. What about at Deakin?
Thanks, Beck. I mean, I guess in some ways our story is similar to Mike's. The difference is Deakin, like all of higher education, suffered dramatic revenue loss in 2020 with an inability to bring international students into the country. And we would see that even if the borders open now, we would see that the loss in students in 2020 playing through into revenue loss in 21, 22, 23. Realistically, of course, borders won't open, which means bigger loss. So from a sort of enterprise PMO perspective, which doesn't entirely sit within my remit, but enterprise PMO perspective, we've seen 2020 brought, you know, a rapid reduction in projects that were doing physical things, you know, building projects, for want of a better term. We held our ICT portfolio flat at 2019 spend, and we'll keep it flat for 21, 22, probably 23, probably. So on the one hand, maintaining the digital spend has been probably a good outcome in the context of a drop in revenue. It's probably also lower than we would have liked to have done. You know, so I think we'll face a backlog of digital needs. It's probably also worth saying that Deakin is slightly more advanced digitally than some of our peers, not necessarily all, but certainly than some. So our shift to online work, I think, was pretty easy. You know, and in some ways we're lucky we just brought in Zoom as an enterprise capability only months before that, for example. But we were used to remote work, and the online work was easy. Even online study, though, which was the real tricky one for us, you know, 64% 4,000 students within a few days all became online. Again, probably a bit easier for us than some institutions. Clearly, our investment profile moving forward will still favour support of online study, online work and so on. But the PMO role in that, of course, is how do you make the right decisions, you know, in terms of what you want to invest in, and how do you know that you're getting business value fast. So I think the increased role of the PMO will definitely be around helping to monitor business, rapid delivery of business value.
Okay, thank you. I might now turn to Matt and to Manuela. We're interested in both of your views on more general what we're seeing, what you're seeing across our client groups, and also some of the latest research, both internal research and from other research organisations. So, Matt and Manny.
Well, exactly what Mike and Rob said is exactly what this is in line exactly what we're seeing. While different industries have been impacted differently by COVID and the change in the world, a lot of the response hasn't been that dissimilar, in that most PMOs have had to take a step back, look at what the impact of what I think Rob's word was, the world, Mike said, the world changed. How is that world changing affected that individual businesses and that industry's current requirements? Like it's about focusing on the necessary and what is important in this changed world. And what we've also seen is that rebalancing of investment. So at a minimum, maintaining the investment in digital and online, but a lot of industries have increased it exponentially, and we've done this rapid acceleration of digital and online development. Whereas previously there was a steady move to it. COVID sort of brought the need forward a few years, which is a lot of people have embraced and have enjoyed it. It's been a shock to others, and a huge, I guess, a huge change management challenge as well to some people. It's created, I think, a bit of exhaustion to some because we've had to change. There's been no choice, but the extent of change has caused some stress for people, and so we're actually needing to manage that a lot better. It's brought the investment horizon, I think, a lot closer. There's still a lot of uncertainty out there, so people are looking at more quick, smaller increments and delivering value, as Rob said, and part of the PMO is to ensure that that is actually happening and being realised at smaller increments.
Yeah, I'd just echo that as well. I think Mike, you mentioned it's not just that there's been a big change, but there'll be likely a series of ongoing changes in the future. So companies aren't just, you know, resetting themselves up and then taking a, you know, thinking the course they're on is going to be the one they're on for the next 5-10 years. That they need to be able to adapt to change quicker, to be a more agile company. And you know that just means sort of being more cognizant and being able to adapt to their strategy more quickly. But also, I think it also reflects in the way projects are delivered as well. As Manny said, a shorter sort of time horizon on things. So yeah, that's what we're seeing.
Fantastic. Well, there's definitely some common themes across all of those answers. Just in terms of promoting some audience participation, we've got a poll which we'd actually like to ask all of our attendees, which is up on your screen at the moment, hopefully. The question is, how do you feel spending in your organisation will compare over the next 12 to 24 months? And you've got 4 answers there, all really using 2020 as a bit of a benchmark. Are you scaling back further from last year, about the same as last year, returning to levels in 2019, or above 2019 spending levels? If you're happy just to do a quick poll there, we will publish those results a little bit later on in the webinar. Do that myself. Hosts and panelists can't vote. Okay, no worries. Move on to the next question while everyone's looking at that poll. Rob, you've touched on this a little bit when you talked, and so has Mike, about the role of the PMO in helping your organisation now you've been through this 2020 change. But in particular, have you got thoughts on how the PMO will help your organisation grow and thrive over the next 1 to 2 years? Perhaps Rob, you could start with this one.
Yeah, thanks, Beck. I mean, I guess to agree, reiterating what I was saying. I mean, I think the monitor and control function plays a critical part. For us, and I guess it's probably true of most organisations at the moment. You have to get value for your investment. If we're not getting value for investment, then the money could be spent on something else, and we really don't have a lot of money floating around. So we're not returning to 2019 investment levels as a whole of university spend. So ensuring value for money, ensuring that we're doing the right things, but also then, as I say, ensuring that we're getting value quickly enough is really important. I think there's more work to be done in terms of really understanding return on investment, and typically universities, I think, are not very good at articulating true return on investment, at least not in Australia. They're a lot better in the States. And I think there's further work we can do around trying to understand how to quantify that value in true ongoing terms. So again, that function is there to be done.
Thanks, Rob. And Mike?
Well, look, I'd probably add another layer to that, I guess, and really reflecting a bit on what Matt just said a couple of minutes ago. Yes, the world has changed, and in a lot of, very fundamental ways. Our boards are, the whole risk management lens is really elevated amongst boards for all sorts of reasons in the last couple of years, but COVID as well. And the response to that, if I was to sort of paraphrase a little, is really to embrace this whole agile thing. What's PMO's role in terms of helping the organisation pivot from one set of aspirations and activities through to new activities that are, may well be responding to external factors well beyond your immediate control. So there's a real shift in PMO's responsibility to keep flexible in terms of its resourcing capability, the partners that they may reach out to and utilise, keeping good visibility on which pieces of work are actually truly aligned to strategy, and the ones that, well, hold on, we've got some choice about these that perhaps don't quite, meet the new requirements for the latest pivot. And hopefully we don't sort of see any major additional events, although, the world's a very, very fragile place at the moment. So, anything can pop up, and I think our boards are very acutely aware of that. And certainly our response has been to add more capability into how we might pivot. All of a sudden, language that may well have been well understood in certain businesses, certainly digital businesses, around using Agile as a way of developing new capability and deploying, suddenly has become a language that business wants to use about how we execute on strategy. We don't need to have, a waterfall view of, this is our landing zone and let's hit the target. It's more, let's test, learn, iterate. And PMO's got a role to play in how we actually execute on that.
Right, Mike. It sounds, just to summarise both of you, what you're saying there is it's a mixture, as always, of doing the right projects and doing those projects right, and making sure that whatever's done in the PMO is helping to move forward the strategy of the organisation. I just wonder whether Matt or Manny might have a view, particularly around some of those elements of that Mike and Rob have raised. One in particularly around measuring value and how PMOs might look to support that, and the return on investment, not necessarily just financial, but the value attributed to initiatives, but also that that trend and how you can support sort of a high, often in some cases, hybrid delivery models in a lot of organisations.
Matt, over to you. I think something came
that
out
was
in
a long question, so you might have to prompt me for part of it. But I think the first part was about benefits management. So look, we list about 16 functions in our survey of, that PMOs can be offering, and benefit management's one of them. It's over the last few years been one of the most popular ones in terms of focus for improvement. And there's certainly a lot PMOs can be doing, from just making sure projects are recording their benefits to having some sort of consolidated benefits register and making sure that's carried on and monitored once the project moves into BAU as well. So yeah, benefits management is definitely an important function. In terms of, I think the next question was about Agile and delivery functions. So look, you hear a lot, PMOs are kind of come under attack in the last year, but they've been under attack for a while. I think from, we're Agile now, we don't need a PMO. And I think that's a shame. I think PMOs can, we see them rephrased as Agile management officers and things, that PMOs can be, a real force in helping companies move to an Agile methodology and ensuring that's, rolled out properly within the organisation. So I think I've answered that question there.
Did, Matt, thanks. Sorry for putting you on the spot. Mike, you smiled around the Agile. Did you have anything you wanted to add there, or?
Oh, look, only that it's, I think it's interesting that it's now started to become part of sort of an organisation's language. And look, I think that's been the promise of that for quite some time. I'm fortunate I work in a business where, we're sort of a conglomerate style business. So we don't build or manufacture anything per se, but, we've got marketing functions and sales functions. And, those guys forever have had this sort of very Agile mentality about how they get their work done. You design an ad campaign, you get it out in the market, and within a very short time, sometimes you realise, oh, that's not really working the way we intended it to, and you turn it off and you move on to the next one, and no one blinks an eyelid. It's like it's just part of this is the operating way in which we do marketing, and maybe we're starting to see organisations realise that if you're going to innovate and you're going to bring new product and you're going to survive in a world that is a little less certain than perhaps what it has been, you need to adopt those sort of practices more generally. And, Agile is a useful term to use without all the technology hanging over the top of it. It's a way of thinking.
I think both methodologies still have their place. I mean, in terms of product development and those sort of things, yes, definitely Agile, particularly now in this environment. But when you're looking at infrastructure projects and some of those others, people still have to have the waterfall skills. So I think you need a bit of both in the PMO to be able to support both methodologies. Beck, I initially passed to Matt on the benefits realisation because I know in the survey that came up as one of the key challenges for PMOs. And I think that's where one of the advantages now is with remote working, you have access to other skill sets which maybe some PMOs don't have. And I think one of the biggest challenges for benefits realisation is the skill set to be able to actually understand the current challenges of the business and actually make a quantitative measure, like develop a quantitative measure to show that you've realised that and then be able to track it. Right. And it's not a discipline or a skill that people have been taught, and there's very few people that know enough of that. And I think that's probably one of the challenges.
Thanks, Manny. Matt, just generally, more back to that original question, that the more general view of what we see as the critical functions of a PMO and how they'll support an organisation to grow and thrive.
Yeah, so our research, showed, not to say that functions like benefits management and change management that we've mentioned aren't important, but for us there were 4 key functions that PMOs can be delivering at the moment that'll help themselves and their organisation sort of thrive through this period. As we've mentioned, with strategies changing, the first one is strategic alignment. So it's critical that organisations understand that the changes in strategic direction and have been involved and sort of intimately aware of that. The second one, portfolio analysis, is this was ranked the fourth most important function this year in terms of focus for improvement for PMOs. And I think that's recognising that that needs to do some analysis on the portfolio to see which projects line up to the tweaked portfolio strategic objectives, and what new projects need to be stood up to deliver any new strategic objectives that have arisen. And those two really fit neatly into that portfolio definition side of things. The next two is, I guess, more around portfolio delivery. So, and these two recognise that organisations can't do everything at once. Many have taken a hit, in terms of their resource capabilities, and also there's that change fatigue factor as well, which was mentioned earlier. So resource management is about understanding that the resources required to deliver the new portfolio of projects, and dependency management is and master scheduling is understanding the sequencing restrictions, I guess, in delivering that portfolio. So, and again, these two were big focus areas in our survey this year. So resource management is the third most important focus area, and dependency management, master scheduling, was actually the biggest mover. So I think it was 17th the year before, and it was the sixth most important this year. So, so yeah, those are the functions that we saw as critical for PMOs to deliver in the current climate, I guess.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. We might, I think, Michelle, our producer for today, might have the poll results from our question, which she might be able to put up on screen. So, interestingly, we've got 44% of the people saying it'll be about the same as 2020, which is probably not surprising, or it is positive. It's certainly interesting to see that there's not many people who think that it'll return to a spending of 2019 level, and certainly, although there are still a few that have got spending returning to above 2019 levels. So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a mixed bag there.
It is a bit of a mixed bag, and it's kind of what I expect there. I think a lot of companies that did put a pause on things, and there's been a bit of a rubber band effect where, there's now these things that they wanted to invest in that they paused, and there's a bunch of new things they want to invest in as well. Whereas, I think organisations are facing different challenges, as we've heard from Mike and Rob today. So there are some that are sort of got tighter budgets than others, perhaps, and aren't in the same position to sort of increase spending, I guess.
And I think just generally, the other thing that 2020 and COVID-19 has shown us is that it hasn't been equally distributed across all industries or all organisations. So that discrepancy across the poll is probably an indication of the breadth of audience we've got, but also indication of what we see more generally in the market.
Yeah.
And I think those organisations that have survived and have got were quite resilient through the crisis now see this as a growth opportunity, and taking an opportunity. So some of them are actually ramping up. Those that have the funding and whose revenue hasn't been hit hard are really taking the opportunity to grow, take the.
Yep.
Yeah, no, look, and that's very much the mindset that we've taken on board, sort of really rethinking what is our business about really out over the next 10 years. And, it's made us realise that investments that, perhaps we'd made 10 years ago, are starting to perhaps not help the organisation navigate both the opportunities and the threats over that period. So, we're really looking to re-architect our business and our technology stack to be more flexible, be a bit more focused in the markets that we know that we need to deal with, support our workforce a little bit better, with some of that sort of remote working capability and lifting that level of capability. So it's actually quite an exciting time that's sort of come out of it from my perspective anyway.
Yeah.
Beck, sorry. was going to say, we're getting a few interesting questions coming through around portfolio management, portfolio analysis, and there's also another one that heads down that sort of agility path. But I actually think that the portfolio questions sort of expand quite well on this point. And I wonder if you mind me sort of heading in that direction a little bit.
I was just about to do that, Rob, but that's perfectly fine. If you want to take that on, we do have a couple. We've got the first question, and feel free, everyone who's on the webinar, continue to post the questions. Please use the Q&A tab rather than the chat tab. It's just easier to answer those questions. But the first one has come in, and that was, does the panel see a difference between choosing which projects to undertake, so portfolio management, and ensuring that projects approved by the business are effectively delivered, i.e. program and project management? And what are the attributes and practices appropriate to each of those two types of PMO? Who would like to start with that question?
I'm happy to, since I flag that.
And
in fact, I was going to attempt to roll in the next question as well, which is, please elaborate a bit more on portfolio analysis, because I actually think that starts to answer that point. I mean, I guess it's interesting in my sector, portfolio management in general is somewhat immature, and my metric for that is higher education very rarely ever cancels a project. And I think if you're never cancelling something that's in flight, the chances are you're not really managing your portfolio at all. So I think we've got a fair way to go. What we're so far, I think, fairly good at is prioritization models that allow us to pick what we think are going to be the right projects. So the portfolio management skills that we need, clearly pick the right projects, which is a collaborative exercise with all of our stakeholders, getting the right engagement, the right balance. But then you get into the point, this next question, what is portfolio analysis? And I think that's where the PMO sort of adds the value. So for me, it's simple. What's the financial performance of the whole portfolio in terms of cost, projected cost, etc.? What's the risk profile of the whole project portfolio? Are we seeing an aggregation of risk beyond just the individual project risks? Are we seeing common issues that are coming across the different projects that we need to intervene on a bigger scale? The change readiness or change acceptance side fits in really well with that aggregation of risk as well. Are we hitting the same parts of our organization with multiple projects at a similar time?
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to absorb these different things? And therefore that allows the portfolio manager, whether that role exists by title or not, to start making calls around, do we pause something? Do we not seek approval for something? Do we slow something down? How do we sequence to best minimize negative impact to the business, maximize positive impact to the business? And I think that's the, if you like, the opportunity for PMO functions and the skill set that really needs to push through, which is not to minimize the need for good project management and program management. Do we deliver our stuff well? Do we understand the realization of benefit? Do we pick the right projects within a program to deliver that benefit? And that's clearly critical. But I do think the opportunity is in portfolio management. I'd be interested, Mike, in how that plays out in your organisation as well.
Yeah, no, look, I think Rob, you picked up on most of the key points there. So yeah, to me, certainly that whole question of alignment to strategy is very much a portfolio function.
Yeah.
And really getting the pieces of work, once you've made those decisions, properly sort of structured up and so that they can be executed. To me, that's sort of where the portfolio piece finishes, and you really shift into delivery and program management, and benefits realisation might hang on the back of that. So yeah, I probably echo most of what Rob said there. Matt?
We've got a follow-up question, which Matt might bring you in on as well, as to get yours and Manny's view on both questions. But PMOs for a while been transitioning away from the monitor and control role and more towards a forward-looking strategy and alignment role. So the 2020 events reinforced this, given the need to cut portfolios. But this is a critical part of the question, but is it possible for PMOs with fixed resources to shift this portfolio level focus? unless there's a confidence in the delivery reporting of individual projects and accountability for governance oversight, potentially shifting this to the business leads and sponsors.
But that's a long question. I'm trying to digest that
again. Yeah, look, I'll try and I'm sort of jumping off the previous stuff. So again, this Axelos MOP material talks about this sort of portfolio definition and portfolio delivery cycles that are intertwined. And I think historically you'd imagine this portfolio delivery is kind of an annual activity. You know, we go through and work out which projects we're going to be doing next budget cycle, and we budget for them, and then we deliver them. And I think if anything, 2020's kind of accelerated that portfolio definition thing a bit. It can't afford to be just an annual thing and we'll set and forget and look at it again next year. I think there's this sort of constant need to reappraise the portfolio. And look at I find strategy maps are conceptually a really good thing to be looking at in this area as well. As what's the strategy, what are the strategic objectives, and what are the projects that are mapping through to help deliver those strategic objectives, and projects that are enabling other projects to deliver them, and things like that. So I think, again, I'm just trying to remember all of that question. I think it is possible and I agree that we are seeing PMOs move more into that, what we call them the higher tier functions of PMOs. So the portfolio analysis, portfolio management type work. It does rely a lot on, the way we diagram it is a kind of pyramid that if you haven't got the foundations right, then your portfolio analysis isn't really going to work. An example of that, I guess, is if you can't understand the benefits that individual projects are delivering, then how can you hope to map them through to strategic objectives? So, look, I think it is possible for a PMO to transition from one style or one focus to another, definitely, and with finite resources. I guess it's a matter of sort of getting the foundation layers correct first, and hoping that becomes an embedded BAU kind of thing, and then changing the focus a little bit more to some of those higher tier functions.
And I mean, I think, sorry, go Rob.
I was going to say, I'd also argue that change is more nuanced. I think PMOs always have a monitor function. You can only know you're doing the right thing if you get some mechanism to ensure that the projects are spending the money wisely, that the benefit is good, that the change impact is appropriate, and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's always monitor. It doesn't have to be laborious and cumbersome, but in best agile mechanisms, you have a monitor. And the control is simply about saying, when we see things deviating off what we're expecting, what's the intervention mechanism? So again, I think in a higher level strategy alignment, portfolio management office, etc., you're still going to need the monitor and control aspect in there. It's just, what does it look like? And therefore,
perhaps it's more emphasis. So where your bigger emphasis is, from monitor and control through to portfolio analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. For finite resources are okay. Sorry, Michael.
No, that's okay. I was looking forward at the next set of questions, Rebecca, and I really like the one that Lisa sent, because I don't think that's unusual for many organisations. It's just, like it's a perfect dart right in the middle of the dartboard, really. It's, how do you get this started, and what's the conversation that you've got to be having, in the organisation? And, to me, the best thing that a small PMO can do that is cash constrained and resource constrained, and we've got too much to do, is to really make sure that the right stakeholders are sitting around a table looking at and hearing transparent information about what is happening, what is being done today, how resources are being allocated today, and making sure that the decision making for what we shift and change to comes from those business stakeholders.
Yeah. Totally spot on, Mike. And my first tip of a mechanism to do that is light touch reporting. If you can get, without it being onerous on your project managers, on your stakeholders, something light touch that gives you that transparent information that the key people can see, you're then starting to have the conversations around what does it mean, and what changes do we want to make, and then you show value.
We do have an interesting question here, which might go against some of the things that we've been talking about, which is that the PMOs have been under pressure. We've got a post-COVID, we've seen a surge of interest in PMOs, mostly to help resolve the mess of projects that fell over when the focus suddenly shifted to supporting staff to work from home. So has this been any of our experiences on the panel? And if yes, what are the reasons in your country or location? So it's an interesting question. I might throw this to Matt and Manny, because we've actually got some research from the PMO survey to start with, and perhaps that might help us to either say that hasn't been the research and the research base that we did, or it has, and if not, and then might jump to Rob and Mike if they've got anything specific around that question.
Matt, I'm not sure, I don't recall what came out in the survey about this, but I would, I mean, I've seen PMOs, I guess the interest is that they should have, as soon as it happened, I saw most PMOs pivot, I hate the way everyone's using pirouette pivot, to actually helping embed remote delivery and make it effective and supporting it, while I saw other functions help supporting the staff working from home. I saw PMOs focusing on embedding those new ways of delivering remotely.
Yeah, I guess you know, the sudden surge in interest in PMOs, yeah, is an interesting one for me. If anything, I saw PMOs coming under a bit more threat in 2020. You know, I think organisations looking to cut costs, and all too often PMOs just seen as a cost rather than a benefit. So hopefully today we're trying to explain some of the benefits that PMOs can bring, especially in times of stress for organisations. But yeah, I guess I find that a little surprising, that the surge in interest in PMOs.
I'm wondering whether the question is when it first hit, whether there was that cut in spending of PMOs, because some people just reacted and cut it, which is what you saw in the survey. And then following on from that, several months later, now people are saying that because they cut those resources, they've suddenly got this issue where projects managers just weren't supported.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is a cyclical thing, and you know, there's stuff that in our research and other research about the lifespan of PMOs, but often they will dissolve and then get reformed in some way, shape or form. So.
We've got another question here. It's a specific one. So who should be accountable and authorised to choose the projects? The portfolio management office or the business? Rob, you're laughing. You get to answer this.
I'm laughing because I fully expect that Bertrand, who asked the question, absolutely knows the answer to that.
I know he knows the answer too. I just
but for the benefit of everyone else, I mean, clearly the business, and clearly one of the functions of a PMO and equivalent functions is to help ensure that the right decision makers are making the right decisions and helping with that maturity of decision-making process.
Yep, absolutely. Anyone else want lots of nods? Should we all agree that definitely should be a business call?
And a big part of the PMO's role, I think, in that is making sure that it's not the person that screams the loudest or that has the greatest sort of power gets. It's about what's right for the business strategically.
Maybe there's a John's also asked a subsequent question, which I think is quite aligned to the conversation there. But you know, to me, around, you know, how do you make sure that PMO is not just the process police? Yeah, because there is an element of that, you know, particularly if you start to get into enterprise PMO, and you know, you've got you know, often PMOs associated with the technology function, but you know, as you get into enterprise level PMO, you're really starting to see the sort of wider organisational lens on, you know, which things are important and how we're allocating our resources to change more holistically. You know, and the ownership of PMO, you know, structurally, process, tooling, you know, reporting, all that might live in your technology function, because, you know, we've sort of got good at doing it. But actually the core ownership of the overall process really needs to sit at the top level in the organisation. It needs to be with your executive, and not just one executive. It should be, shared executive ownership, because that's how you avoid that. And then, it helps to ensure that, when you've got projects that perhaps technology doesn't have a direct line of accountability for or control over, you can still compel them to do the right level of reporting and, to make sure that, you're getting a portfolio view on where we're up to and where the risks are and issues, etc. So.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Now, there's a couple of questions around tools. One is a specific question about how you can advise a customer that using Excel spreadsheets to manage large multi-year transformation portfolios can only go so far. I think we see Excel in pretty much every step of everything we do in organisations that perhaps, on the surface you wouldn't expect to find them holding together very large organisations. But across the panel, perhaps again one for Manny and Matt in how you would go about advising a client to either continue or not with their Excel management of a large portfolio.
Yeah, I was thinking that the three questions I get asked most commonly are: who should the PMO report to? How many people should be in my PMO, and what tools we should use? And all of them are really, really tough questions to answer because it's really particular to organisations. And it sounds like a cop-out answer, but like I said, PMOs are so different. I've never seen this. I go organisation to organisation. Every single PMO is different. The nature of the organisation is different. The nature of the project portfolio is different. So if your portfolio is 90% IT, then probably a PMO should report to the CIO. But and the same with tools. If you're at a stage where the focus for the PMO is on that project delivery side of things, then maybe there are tools that are at that kind of that end of simple things like Microsoft Project or whatever that you could be using. If you're looking to move into Agile, then maybe we're talking Jira and things like that. If you're looking at higher level portfolio analysis type stuff, then maybe you're looking for Project Server or Primavera or whatever. It's a really tough question to answer these things without knowing the size of the portfolio, the nature of the projects, and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to have to kind of leave it there, really.
That's fine. Thank you, Matt.
I sort of wonder, I mean, if the question is really around a transformational project or program, I always find the best thing is the published research. And certainly in Victoria, the Auditor General's Office do some great reports into particularly ICT project failures, and that I find them very useful reading and very useful to give to people to read if they think they can underdo the management of projects or programs. If the question's more about a portfolio, I think that's tough, because trying to show a return on investment to buy a proper PPM tool is very, very difficult. And certainly at Deakin, we haven't nailed that point. But again, echoing Matt's question, Matt's point, it's going to be a question of scale to a large degree. Excel and different Microsoft project views can be sufficient if the dollars per year, your burn rates aren't so dramatically high. If you're talking high levels and you're looking at, you could probably quantify some problems that you've got along the way from lack of monitoring or lack of easy monitoring. So maybe that can give you a return on investment. Yeah.
And look, we ask a question in the survey about which tools the PMOs use, and Excel is one. I'm just trying to look at the stats right now. I probably shouldn't do this while I'm online, but it was 81% last year suggested. So, the vast majority of PMOs, whichever level they're at, are going to use Excel. But as for the other tools, there's a really, really, spread of usage between them. And as I said, when we come into organisations, we look at the functions. What are the problems that the PMO is expected to solve, and what are the functions that it needs to deliver, and that'll drive which tools are best for those functions. So, yeah.
And I think it depends what you're using Excel for. I mean, it's not going to show you dependencies. That's where project does come in. I mean, and how to advise a customer. I mean, first I'd like to understand, I mean, the first is what are you trying to do? Like what outcomes you're looking for? And then if the customer, why is the customer only using Excel? Is it a skills thing? Is it a comfort thing? And then maybe show them how much, like what project can do to show dependencies or something else can do that is within their, I guess, their range if the investment can't be made. But just to use Excel for a portfolio would be very challenging, because there's very little, you can't see overall dependencies, or you can't manage resources. So it depends on what the outcomes.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. There is another, we've got about 7 minutes to go, so keep the questions coming in, but we have another one. We struggle, and specifically, we struggle with project prioritization. So in view of all the panels, what's the top 3 criteria do you use to prioritize projects in your organisation? Mike, I might throw over to you, if I can.
Look, it's a bit of a tricky one, and each organisation is going to be a little bit different. But really, to me, the question of alignment, sits right at the top of the tree. So, having recently redone strategy, and worked out at a portfolio level, oh, well, these are the sort of initiatives that we need to run. You can pretty quickly sort of get at least a high level view of what that should look like. And the things that you might assess will be inevitably, strategic alignment, cost to deliver, risk profile. Maybe it's a blend of those 3 things, top of mind. Things that might sit down in the quadrant that sort of says, lower risk, lowest cost, highest benefit. You're going to put them up the top because, they might be quick wins. Things that sit more in the higher cost, more moderate risk, more moderate business value, you're going to prioritise those a little bit differently. But, those 3 lenses, and really, part of the conversation we had earlier around the whole benefits realisation, inevitably, if you've got pieces of work that are going to impact upon revenues, impact directly on efficiency gains and the way your organisation ticks, those sort of things are going to self-elect pretty quickly. And coming up with a system where you categorise your projects really easily. Well, these are our gold projects or our platinum projects or, our bronze projects, for example. That helps with the messaging out into the organisation that, assuming platinum's your best, it's your most important. Quickly people will make sure that, okay, if someone comes to me about a platinum project, I know that's important, I'm on that. So getting that sort of, system to categorise your projects in place to simplify all the logic that made you arrive at that level is quite important.
Yeah, and look, I'm just offer. I would think that some of the reasons why I've certainly seen organisations struggle with that prioritisation is that it isn't that they might have those systems and the PMO might run those, but culturally there's still very strong voices or loud voices. There's certainly pet projects, and so some of those things can undermine then the processes that are put in place to do that kind of prioritisation. So without knowing what the questioner's struggle particularly is, it's hard to nail it for that particular organisation. But Rob, have you got any?
Yeah, I was going to say, you made an interesting point there, Beck, and we've actually taken we've sort of flipped that a little bit at Deakin within our digital project. So we have a couple of hurdles before we consider prioritisation, and one is strategic alignment, architectural alignment, whatever you want to frame that on a binary yes/no perspective. So not drilling down to how aligned, but is it not? Okay, so if it's not, then forget it. The other hurdle, though, is senior executive support. So again, what we've discovered is that if we don't have loud voices at the top executive table, then the project's probably not going to get very far. It's going to be hard work and so on. And so we have a couple of, fairly senior stakeholders who might go, why is my project way down the prioritization list? And the answer is, well, because your big boss, or your boss perhaps, isn't championing it, isn't pushing it forward. So we actually want that. We want that behavior at the very top level, because we want to know what people really care enough about beyond their BAU activities. But then after that, we're into, well, the first criteria is business continuity. So we work in a highly regulated industry. So there's certain stuff that have to happen. And it doesn't really matter whether it aligns to strategy or not. It's going to have to happen because it keeps the lights on. Beyond that, though, it's a value risk assessment. And I won't go into the details, but we use 4 measures for value and 4 measures for risk. And they're given scores and they're given certain weighting, and we balance those out. But it's similar to Mike's response then.
Fantastic, Rob. Thank you. Look, we've got 2 minutes to go, and I think what I guess it's really time for us to say thank you for all the attendees and for the panelists in particular for the discussion today. There's no doubt we have had an interesting discussion, and interestingly, it has mainly been around that portfolio analysis and how do you ensure alignment and value, and perhaps the changing role from a more policing or monitoring and control function of a PMO to rebalance to support more that portfolio analysis and just strategic decision making. So it's a really exciting conversation, and I hope everyone's enjoyed that. I'd again like to thank our panelists, in particular our clients who have joined us for today, Rob and Mike, and also to Manny and Matt for the work that they've put in to this morning, not quite this afternoon, to this morning here in Australian Eastern Time anyway, this morning's webinar, and all the research that's gone behind it. I'd also just quickly like to thank Michelle, our producer. She's been a great help in getting this off the ground, and we wouldn't have been able to do it without her. In terms of follow-up, please feel free to go and download the 2020 PMO research paper, which was led by Matt Robinson. Some of it's been referred to today. There's an article out in the AIPM's Paradigm Shift, which you can find via LinkedIn, and feel free to follow Escient also on LinkedIn for any more follow-ups around PMOs. We will also be following you all up individually with a link to today's webinar if you missed anything or wanted to come back to any of it. And obviously feel free to reach out to any of us directly if you'd like to. There will be a self-assessment efficiency survey which will go out and will be live for you to do, and we will let you know when that's available as part of our follow-up. So right on 12 o'clock, I'd like to close the webinar and thank you all for attending. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
See you, folks.